When this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit.
Recently, at the insistence of a friend of mine, I watched Back to the Future for the first time ever. To start off, I've never been a huge fan of watching old movies because I'm usually put off by the bad acting or cheesy camera angles, the dialogue, and the hairstyles. God, that could be a whole video by itself. But when I started Back to the Future, I was surprised to see a pretty normal looking guy. Marty McFly is a character that sort of oozes coolness, which I can imagine was the main draw of the film upon its release. Setting aside the sci-fi, timey-wimey stuff for a moment, having a likable main character in Marty is one of the main things that I liked about the film. In my opinion, it doesn't matter how cool a story concept is or how much potential it has to be interesting. The biggest part of a good movie or TV show for me is the main character. If the protagonist of a film isn't likable or at least capable in their given niche, I can't get behind them. Some notorious examples of this are shows like Neon Genesis and Fear the Walking Dead, both featuring main characters who are just irritating, and don't give you much motivation to support them or see them succeed. Marty McFly is not one of those characters. Starting off the movie in a truly 80s sci-fi movie-esque way, Marty blasts himself across the room by playing a note on his electric guitar, which is hooked up to a dangerously large amplifier, which should have damaged his internal organs, or at the very least blown out his eardrums. But lucky for him, the laws of physics aren't a factor in the laws of comedy. The start of the film featured a very unique and fun way to introduce a main character, showing his way of life and all the weird little gadgets and robots that seem to be a part of his daily routine. Before I go any further, I will preface by saying that while I've never actually seen the movie before, I had seen clips of it, and I was already pretty familiar with the concept and plot. The main reason I'd never given it a shot up until now was that I was iffy about the CGI potentially being awful and taking me out of the moment, which is another big reason why I don't typically watch older films. However, the blend of CGI and practical effects was brilliant. And at no point did I explicitly think about the fact that I was just looking at lighting effects and camera angles. The flaming tire tracks left behind every time the car went back or forward in time were a really nice touch, and further lent to the sense of the immense energy that must be needed to power an invention like the DeLorean. And now that I'm on the topic of the DeLorean, there just couldn't be a cooler name for a car to use as a time machine.
The way I see it, if you're gonna build a time machine into a car, why not do it with some style?
DeLorean just sounds futuristic. Maybe it's just me, maybe I'm influenced by the impact of this movie despite only just now seeing it, but I really like the car. Moving on, Doc is probably my favorite part about the movie. There's just something about an unhinged genius that does whatever he wants, even to the point of breaking the laws of physics, that draws me in. It's the same reason I found Rick and Morty entertaining. Ironic, I know. I saw the show that was based on Back to the Future before I saw the actual thing. Yell at me in the comments if you want. However, seeing Rick and Morty before this movie allowed me to appreciate it in a way that others may not be able to. It was very interesting to see the inspiration for Rick, and mainly to see the character traits I liked about Rick, minus the parts of his character that I didn't like so much. I think the best way to illustrate the differences between the two would be to first compare how they are similar. Both are obviously older men, presumed to be at least in their 70s, and are exceptionally, unfathomably intelligent. So intelligent that they seem to be able to figure out loopholes and workarounds to the laws of physics just by doing a little basic, out-of-the-box thinking. Both have developed devices that would be sought after by governments and criminal organizations across the planet in the real world. And both use these devices for purely personal benefits, although their motivations do differ. And here's where the two characters basically split apart completely. While both are obviously incredibly talented scientists, Doc is not a nihilistic person who disregards everyone around him in the pursuit of his goals. He actually seems to really care about Marty, and seems to always be happy to see him and have him around, unlike Rick, who never seems to care one way or another. Doc is also not a raging alcoholic like Rick, further lending to his likability as a character. Doc is simply an innocent old grandpa type character, who just happens to be a little bit insane and a major intellectual outlier. Now onto the plot of the film. Marty is the son of a typical 80s middle-class family, but when his old friend Doc Brown shows him his latest invention, the iconic DeLorean time machine, Marty's life is forever changed. Going back in time and seeing aspects of his own life from his dad at his age, he helps him to grow his confidence, to stand up to his high school bully, and ultimately gets his parents to fall in love at the high school dance, preventing himself from being erased from existence due to his own shenanigans. In the end, he returns to 1985, but now to an improved family. George was once a McWalk, but is now a fully fledged McFly. Finally, the movie ends on a setup to the second movie, with Marty McWalk about to embark on a new adventure with Doc Brown. Now, firstly, I have to say that Back to the Future was not what I expected it to be. For some reason, whenever I imagine the movie beforehand, I imagine this overly futuristic setting full of wild, fever dream-esque ideas about what future technology might look like, much as you would expect from a time travel movie from the 80s. I was pleasantly surprised to see that the consequences of time travel in this film actually stuck, and weren't completely overwritten at the end of the movie. We weren't given an identical starting and ending point, as you would expect from other time travel stories, where all the drama and resulting conflict comes from the time travel itself. But rather, the place we end up at is objectively better than where we began. The ending of the movie actually feels like a happy ending, as every plotline we were introduced to at the beginning is wrapped up nicely. And there is no looming conflict, like a messed up timeline, to resolve in the next film. Instead, the setup for a sequel comes in a simple mention by Doc of Marty's kids. Not enough to call it a cliffhanger, but just enough to get people thinking about a possible Back to the Future 2, which I think was really well done. One could technically watch Back to the Future 1 and completely ignore the other two, and it would still hold up just as well. Unlike some modern films, where the plot is never properly wrapped up because the creators want to make a sequel before ever actually finishing the first movie. One thing I want to touch on quickly is the presence of a musical scene at the end of the movie. I've never been a big fan of musicals, or even just little instrumental numbers, as I feel like they completely detract from the plot and overall flow of a movie. However, while I still found it a little silly, the musical scene in Back to the Future is definitely an exception to this rule. In this movie, having the main character sing and play music actually fits his character, as he is introduced at the beginning of the film as an aspiring guitarist. Also, the musical scene in this movie isn't there just for the fun of it. It actually helps to wrap up an earlier storyline in the movie, where Marty is rejected by the school, funnily enough, by the man who actually wrote the song he is playing in real life. Now, at the end, he is accepted by the crowd, cheered on, and even apparently being scouted by musicians for his new sound. A far cry from earlier on when he barely got a few notes off before being told to stop. I'd also like to make note of the soundtrack to this movie, as I found it interesting how the songs often didn't seem to fully fit the huge nature of the action on screen, specifically during the time travel scenes. Other sci-fi movies with a similar premise, be it time travel or space travel, typically use loud, larger-than-life sounds, with swelling orchestras and a ton of post-production editing. However, in Back to the Future, the music just feels fun and exciting, never too big for the characters on screen. You almost get the sense that while these wild, physics-defying things are happening on screen, the action you're watching is still within their grasp, and the danger is never too in-your-face and stressful. I think the best comparison I can make to illustrate my point here is in the movie Justice League, when the Flash goes back in time to save the world. The music is frankly terrible in this scene. It plays the same guitar hook on repeat, gradually introducing a swelling orchestra, which is annoyingly the standard in today's age of cinema, and leaves no real room for you to stress about what is happening on screen. A good movie soundtrack should enhance the way the creators intended the audience to feel while watching, and it shouldn't sound cool just to sound cool. In the case of Back to the Future, this is done really well, as the music is always in keeping with the character of Marty McFly, or with the era and time that he is supposed to be in at a given moment. In Justice League, the same cannot be said. The music almost takes me out of the moment, as never at any point am I worried for the main characters. As soon as something concerning happens to our characters, this overly hopeful attempt at badass music starts playing. We know the Flash is about to do something before we even see him, and you as the viewer are not even given a second to sit with the fact that everything just went wrong for the heroes. Instead, what is supposed to be the darkest scene of the movie is cut short by this music, letting you know that everything is going to be fine before you even have a chance to think about everything that went wrong. Now, I'd like to note that Justice League is one of those movies where time travel has massive implications for the entire world, even if only one person is making changes. Unlike Back to the Future, where the consequences seem to be localized to the person making the changes. Because of this, the difference in the soundtrack is understandable, even justified, no matter how I may feel about it. Obviously, a moment that affects the whole world should sound more impactful than a moment that only affects one kid and his family. To wrap things up, let's talk a little bit about Doc. I love this character. He's eccentric, funny, and seemingly invents complex machines just to perform the most basic tasks, like making toast or opening a can. Upon learning that Marty is indeed from the future, Doc immediately gets started on a way to generate the
1.21 gigawatts
needed to power the time machine and get Marty back to his time.
What the hell is a gigawatt?
Showing us that he does care about people and is happy to use his knowledge in service to them. When Marty hands Doc the letter explaining what will happen to him on the night he goes back in time, Doc refuses to accept the letter, citing his fear of messing with the fabric of space-time. But when we finally get back to the future, Doc is wearing a bulletproof vest. Marty asks about why he kept the letter, even though he said he didn't want it, and Doc simply says,
I figured. What the hell?
I love this moment, as it seems to reveal that mere moments after Marty left in the DeLorean, Doc changed his mind completely about everything he was saying about time and space, and picked up the letter he had just ripped apart. This perfectly shows the insane genius of Doc Brown, as while he is smart enough to be fully aware of the potential consequences of keeping a letter from the future, he is just crazy enough not to care, and to do it anyway. Despite being nearly 2 hours long, at no point during the movie was I checking how much time was left, nor did I ever feel bored by the plot. The story progression was fast-paced and enjoyable, and almost reminiscent of a cartoon in some ways, with the way stereotypes were used for certain characters like George's bullies, as well as the weird design choices they had, such as that one guy who always wore 3D glasses for some reason. I didn't expect to ever watch this film, but I must say I am glad that I did, as I can see now why it is a classic, and many people tout it as timeless. I was pleasantly surprised by how good this movie is, from the characters to the CGI to the music. Huey Lewis and the news as the soundtrack is just awesome. The acting was a little cheesy in some spots, but it did lend to the comedy in the end, so it's not really a negative. I will most likely be watching Back to the Future 2 in the near future, though whether I review it or not is yet to be decided. However, if you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you left a comment below telling me what you think. If you have any video ideas or series recommendations for me, I'd love to hear them. Stay tuned for more movie reviews like this one, as well as TV retrospectives and anime and manga coverage. Thanks for watching and take it easy.